You're listening to another episode of the Fredericksburg Strong podcast. This is a local forum to inform and entertain our community, discuss local news, promote small businesses, and celebrate our hometown heroes with a little dose of humor to keep you entertained. Our mission is simple: to keep Fredericksburg strong. Today's podcast is powered by Pohanka Nissan and Pohanka Hyundai of Fredericksburg. And now, here's your host, Tim Pohanka.
Good morning, everybody. It's Tim Pohanka, and I'm here with a very, very special guest. I have Allyson Witherspoon, who is the Vice President of Marketing, Communications, and Media for Nissan North America. Welcome, Allyson.
Hi, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So just so everyone understands, Allyson and I actually worked together on a committee with Nissan for marketing, so that's how we got acquainted. But I know how you and I got acquainted, but I have I want to start this off is, what made you choose this field?
Automotive. It starts a long time ago. I fell in love with cars when I was a little girl. I was fascinated by the design, and then you turn 16 and there's nothing better than getting your driver's license. So I've always had this connection with cars, and my entire career has been in automotive. I started out as a consultant working with dealers on implementing brand and advertising standards. I spent several years at agencies working for Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Volvo, and then a few years ago I came to Nissan. So that's been my career journey, but more importantly, my automotive journey.
Now, you chose marketing. What drove you to marketing as opposed to design? When you mentioned design earlier, so what drove you to that?
I went to college. I went to the University of Missouri. I started out as an accounting major, and I had a knack for finance and accounting. And I took an international advertising class, and it literally changed my life. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but I knew right then and there that's what I wanted to do the rest of my life. So I changed my major. What I really liked about it is I liked taking consumer insights and finding a way to kind of take that and have an understanding of what consumers want and what they're looking for, and have ways for brands to deliver that through messaging and through creative.
It's funny you should say it that way, because I remember back in my college days, and I keep thinking what I should have taken to go with my business degree, and I keep going back, I should have taken psychology classes. Nothing can help you more in retail, I would think, than looking at the psychology that goes into that. And you talked about what makes consumers make their brand choices. So to me, I think, God, I should have done that. Is that similar to yourself? Is there a class that you wish you would have taken?
I think I wish I would have taken photography, actually. Psychology, I did take a fair amount of psychology, but I wish I would have actually taken, I'm creative leaning. I have the business side, but I also am very creative leaning, and so I wish I would have taken photography. Actually, is the one thing that I wish I would have done in college that I didn't do. I just wanted to get out of school, actually, and just start working. So I was trying to get through as fast as I could.
So looking at your resume, one thing that it does immediately jump off the page is the fact that you've spent a lot of time in different parts of the world. So how is it going from the United States and understanding what happens here to going to Europe or going into Japan to try to really understand the differences in culture or differences in goal?
Sure. So, and I'm a little bit unique in that I've spent almost half of the last decade working abroad. So I've worked for Volvo. I worked for Volvo's ad agency. I was leading the agency team based out of Amsterdam. And so I did that for a few years, and then I spent 2017 through 2019 basically in Japan. I think the biggest thing is that when you work abroad, it gives you different perspectives about what works and what doesn't work when it comes to brands and messaging. And I think through that process, you really learn about where you can take inspiration from. And I'm a firm believer that you can take inspiration from everywhere, but it's how you package it up. And I feel like my experience working abroad has given me a very broad set of tools to tap into, to understand, what consumers are looking for and how we can try to crack that through messaging and through creative. I also think, a little bit on the psychology side, it working abroad, it's not easy, and I lived in amazing cities in Amsterdam and Tokyo, but I was definitely out of my comfort zone, almost to the point that I'm now very comfortable being out of my comfort zone, which is sometimes that can be a little bit dangerous. But it really pushes you mentally. It gives you these challenges that you don't necessarily have when you're in the cocoon of the US, or even where you grew up. So I think there's the business side. And again, I have a broader set of tools than I did before I worked abroad. And then you also it's a mindset shift, and it's really starting to be comfortable outside of your comfort zone, taking risks. And then I think it's given me the opportunity to see the world, professionally and personally, which I've always loved. It's something I have wanted also to do since I was a kid. So it's giving me that opportunity as well, which I'm super grateful for.
It's interesting that you mentioned tools that you would have because of looking at the world as a marketing area versus the United States. When I look at the United States and I think about all the different dealers and the different markets and talking to different people who I have as dealer friends across the country, there's not really a similar market anywhere in our country, let alone the world. So how do you find ways to make those tools work together to get the result you're looking for?
Yeah, and I think that my philosophy on marketing is that there can't be a one size fits all approach, especially when you're looking at global marketing, because cultural nuances are so important, especially if you're going to be able to break through in that market. So I do not believe that one size fits all marketing works across every country around the world. It just doesn't. What I do think that you can take bits and pieces of things in other markets. So if there's, a different type of media approach in one market, that you can take the inspiration from and start to pressure test that, in the US as an example. Or if there are different ways of approaching creative, if it's, if you're looking at formats, or if you're looking at a different way of showing the car, it's more about taking bits and pieces of inspiration, and then taking my experience of knowing just inherently and from experience what works in the US, and putting all those pieces together. But it's that broader set of tools, it's that broader set of inspiration set. But at the end of the day, the package of that has to be relevant for the market where you're working, which in this case and now is the US.
So one of the things that people ask me when I tell them what I'm doing with marketing or what I'm involved, they seem to tell me that they think it's a Mad Men episode where everyone sits in these rooms and everyone's smoking and drinking and sitting on 60s furniture or whatnot. How would you describe someone in the industry today versus the most popular TV show about advertising of all time?
First of all, I loved that show, and I worked and that show was on when I was actually at the agency, and I was thinking, like, this looks nothing like that at all. I think marketing today is very insight and data oriented. There is the creative piece of it, and that goes without saying, and that will always be part of marketing, forever until the end of time. I think the customer insights and the data that we have available now, that's really what's been the game changer, in that, we know a lot about what consumers are looking for. We know when they're in market, and now we have infrastructures and platforms and tools to be able to customize our messages based on what they're looking for and when they're going to be in market. The days of it just being a one size fits all TV spot that's going to cover everything that everyone's going to need, that isn't the reality anymore, because you have consumers that are on multiple screens. They're constantly being bombarded with messages from brands, and as a brand trying to intercept these consumers, you have to know how to break through that, and you really need those insights and data in order to do that. So I think it's become less lifestyle, which is what Mad Men was a little bit about, and it's much more data and insight oriented.
When you bring up data, one of the things that a lot of people always get concerned about is they start looking at, oh my gosh, I was talking about XYZ product and now it mysteriously showed up in my Facebook feed. Are they listening to me? How much of big data is a problem for consumers versus a benefit?
Yeah, and this is a huge topic right now. I think that it's big data. I think when it's used properly, it works well and consumers respond well to it. if you're a brand and you take advantage of that, or you do something that's creepy, that's when consumers get turned off. And that's why I think, the data is there to help kind of fuel what the messaging is. And, ultimately it's there to drive something that's much more relevant for the consumers looking for. But we have a responsibility as brands to do that in a way that has integrity and respect towards the consumer. So I think if it's very overt that you're taking, consumers' information and then creating messaging around that, I think that's going to be a turnoff. If you're doing something that's going to create something more relevant for them in a way that doesn't feel like we're infringing on their privacy, then I think you're going to be much more successful and higher conversion rate if you're doing that as a brand. What we're seeing around the world, and Europe has probably the strictest, China is a completely different animal, but Europe has some of the strictest policies around data privacy. And I think we'll start to see a lot more of that in the US. It's already happening in California, but I think there will be much more regulatory factors that come into play about how and where we can activate against the data that we have. Obviously, we can't have, kind of PII, which is the personally identifiable information. But how much can we kind of show what we know about the consumer? I think that will change over time. But the key takeaway is really to show integrity and how that information is being used, and show relevance and what you're going to be giving to the consumer after they give you their data.
So on that topic, what's the creepiest ad you've seen then?
The creepiest? That's a great question. Sometimes when you're in Instagram, or you're talking on the phone and then something will pop up the next time you go into one of the apps, that to me is the creepiest. I find it's the talking one, I think that's where it gets really creepy. That's super creepy to me. And I think, and when I think about what to do, when I think about it in automotive, and when I think about connected cars, I remember I was in some brainstorming sessions a few years ago, and again, connected cars and what we're talking about is several years out. But how does that live as an ad platform? And I was pretty vocal at the time, like we should be very careful when how we use cars as an ad platform, because consumers are going to want to opt in. We have to be respectful in how we use the information. So I think, again, as the person that's responsible for determining where and how we show up, I want to make sure that we're doing that in the way that is the most respectful to consumers.
I think that's a really good point. I was driving my car the other day, and a digital radio stream came up, and they actually had an ad in the place where normally would put their radio station name. And I was going, okay, now we're getting, this is weirding me out, because I'm driving my Nissan, I got a BMW ad on there. I'm going, wait a second, and I could see how that would happen.
But then so when also, what I do think is, and just to kind of build on that, when it is helpful is when say you're searching for things and you're online shopping, and then maybe a couple of days later you're getting something that was similar to what you're searching for, but with a different spin on it, or maybe from a brand that you hadn't considered before. That's when I think it's helpful, because I think that in some cases, especially when you think about Gen Z, they're not going to be exposed to linear TV the way other generations will be. They're going to discover brands through social media, essentially. And so I think, how we can find ways, and that's how they'll be discovering the brands. That's how we're going to be showing up to them. So we need to be mindful of that and do it in a way that's going to be relevant and deliver value to them.
So when you think of it that way, what's an ad campaign that you've seen that you wish that you'd come up with?
Oh, there are a lot. And this is such a generic answer, and you're going to have to forgive me, but I think Apple does things, they do it perfectly almost every single time. And I would argue every single time. I think what's interesting about Apple is, they're very clear in their positioning, which I think is what makes it strong. They're very clear in what their creative direction is going to be. They're very clear in their messaging and how they want the brand to show up. But I think they've also evolved over time. A few years ago, and I have some friends that work at Apple, but a few years ago, they didn't believe in social media. And, that when you're a brand like that, you can probably take that stand, but they've evolved over time because they understand that this is how consumers are discovering and learning about new product. So I think they're disciplined in who they are and how they want to communicate about their product, but they're flexible and they react to how it gets to consumers, which I think is interesting. There's also I what I'm really liking right now and what I've inspired by is actually a lot of influencer content. And there's a hair care company called Way, that's based out in California. That's was developed by an influencer, kind of a celebrity hairstylist. And I think they have a really interesting way of tapping into culture and into the social media world, and turning that into, an incredibly successful and profitable business. So I also, those are kind of two very different types of companies. One huge and obviously one of the most valuable brands in the world, and then one that's kind of up and coming but has found their footing, using this completely new marketing environment.
You bring up Apple, and Apple's a very good company to bring up because Nissan and Apple do share a little bit of DNA. Let's talk, when you look at an Apple ad and you go, wow, that's really great, and then hey, we do share some DNA, does that make you go, what happened, or why is ours different, or what's the creative process that they use there?
Yeah, sure. And I think, so Apple and Nissan, actually, we share the same ad agency, not in the same location, although it started that way at the time. But we have the same ad agency with TBWA Chiat. To me, I think usually the creative process, and I've been agency side and now brand side, the creative process is the same. And I know, I know the creative team at Apple, the process is always the same. I think the difference comes into kind of the push for creative excellence. And, at Apple, obviously that was driven a while, that was driven initially by Steve Jobs, and that has continued through the company. And it's what I'm trying to do on the Nissan side. And I got into my role a little over a year ago, and it's what I've been trying to drive through, and what Tim, you and I have been talking about in the marketing subcommittee is really driving for creative excellence. It takes both the agency and the client to get to that. And so I think when you look at what Apple has done, we talked to them a lot about some of the a little bit of the discipline that goes into that, and how do they get to that great creative. But it also comes from us pushing on the brand side and not accepting something that isn't going to be impactful, especially for some of the big launches that we have coming up. I think for us, Sintra is a good example. We had a few rounds, and we weren't feeling that it was going to be breakthrough yet. And so, we went to the agency and pushed to make sure that we got to breakthrough, which I think that we did, and we're starting to see that in the results. So it takes both sides. You need to have strong marketers that understand communication, that understand the platforms, but then that partnership between the brand and the agency, that has to be there. And if it's not, you can feel it in the work, actually.
It's good you bring that up, because sometimes you look at an ad and you go, oh my God, that's really great art, but it's not going to get me to buy anything. Or you look at an ad and you go, wow, that really breaks through and it's really daring. And I would think that's more of what Apple was willing to do, is they were willing to do some things that took some pretty big chances. Would you agree with that?
I would completely agree. And I think when you go back to the 1984 Super Bowl commercial, I think in any process, that probably scared 90% of the people that saw that. And I would imagine that there was a lot of discussion about it shouldn't run. And I think even in some of the books that I've read about that campaign, there was a lot of that. But I think there was some fearlessness on the side of Apple and Steve Jobs, and there was fearlessness on the side of the agency. And, is that a great piece of creative? Did that communicate about all the intricate details of the Macintosh at the time? It didn't. But what it did is it made you think about Apple differently, and it made you want to be somebody that broke against convention. And that's that mindset shift. And so you start to think about that company differently, and you start to think about that brand and those products differently.
Because wouldn't you, when I think of Apple now, I don't necessarily think of it as a technology company. I think it's a company in search of excellence, and no matter what they do, whether no matter, and I think that. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, every time Apple puts that logo on something else, people are going to be drawn to it. Doesn't matter what it is because of their history of excellence.
Yeah. And I think they've built up that value over time, that brand value. And again, if you start from the Macintosh and maybe that was the inflection point, they have consistently done that. And I think that is what gives them the liberty to get into other areas that are outside of hardware. And if you think about where their profit generation is coming from, you think about iTunes was a game changer. iPhone, there was BlackBerry was there at the time, but iPhone was a game changer when it comes to, actual communication. So I think they have built that value over time because they've been consistent about how they want consumers to feel about their product and the excellence of it, but also the simplicity of the delivery of that. And they've been really mindful about how consumers want to engage with them. And when you think about the Apple Store, when that came out at the time, that was also groundbreaking. So I think they've been able to evolve as a company beyond hardware, but they've done that being consistent and true to themselves and true to the values. And that value is around excellence and, kind of delivering a superior product.
Keeping kind of on that art versus that art in advertising, if we start looking at Super Bowl ads and how much money Super Bowl ads can cost, and what's being conveyed in that, as a advertiser, when you look at that, is that Super Bowl spot you're spending so much money for, is it that time where you really want to be artsy, or is it more important, do you think, to try to get your product known?
I think there are two schools of thought on this. I think for me, and I did Super Bowl. I brought BMW back to the Super Bowl in 2011, so I've had experience with Super Bowl. But I think the biggest thing, it depends on what your objective is, kind of going into that.
Oh, that was not good.
I knew it's her connection.
Oh, that was going to be a great question too.
Mm-hmm. We were at Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Here
back.
You are.
Oh, okay. I was about to get my MiFi just in case.
Okay, by the way, that was I was really excited about that answer. So
you go back to the question.
So yeah,
I will edit.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
So yes, let's talk about Super Bowl. Is the art of a Super Bowl ad more important than the products, presenting the product?
There are two schools of thought on this, and I've had experience with Super Bowl, and I was part of bringing BMW back to the Super Bowl in 2011. I think if you are a newcomer, if your it starts with what the objective is. If your objective is to get awareness and just if you're a new entrant, if you're a new category, and it's just about kind of getting awareness, then I think that about if it can be more arty, it can be breakthrough. If it's really about trying to sell something, or communicate a specific, piece of something, or in the case of automotive, a feature or a model actually, then I think you're going to have to do a little bit more heavy lifting when it comes to showing the product. But I think that you can do that in a Super Bowl way. I think that you can do both. And I think that's what's really interesting about Super Bowl as a platform, is that it allows you to, there are certain things that work in Super Bowl. Either way, you're going to have to break through because it's going to be so cluttered. Everyone is an expert in advertising on that one night. So you're automatically going to have everyone looking and thinking about your ad. So you're going to have to find a way to break through. If consumers are going to be able to take away what your message was, and if it was about product, if they're able to search, if, it ends up converting to sales, that is, then that's a win. If you just want to get on the ad meter and you just want it to be about an awareness play, then you're going to start to basically, and you see advertisers do this, pull out all the Super Bowl tricks and put them all into one ad. And that's what you see sometimes. So I think it takes, Super Bowl actually takes a lot of discipline on the part of the brand, but you have to be really clear about what your objective is. If it's about, being top 5, top 10 in the ad meter, you're going to use all the Super Bowl tricks. If you need it to be about driving, intention and consideration and conversion, you're going to have to bring, the product and the art together into it.
What's a Super Bowl trick?
Super Bowl tricks. Yeah, slapstick humor is a big one. Heavy use of celebrity or soundtrack. Those are usually big ones. Reveal moments and kind of behind the scenes secret stuff. Those are examples of some of them. And so those are the main ones. The ones that you see the most are definitely the slapstick humor and use of celebrity. Those are the biggest ones.
You mentioned celebrity, and I want to go here. So let's just assume that money is no object. Who would you think the best celebrity pitch person would be today?
For any brand?
Any brand.
For anyone? I think probably as far as, I mean, if you're, I can't even believe that I'm going to say this, but I think if you're wanting to get eyeballs and you're wanting to kind of get that mass reach, I think you're going to have to go into a Kardashian-Jenner situation. I think regardless of what you think of them, those women can push product. And so I think, and obviously a lot of brands use them, but they can push product. And again, regardless of what you think about them, and, are they credible, as being influencers and kind of these mega celebrities, but they can push a product, and they've been very successful, and they've made a ton of money doing that.
So you mentioned them as influencers, and you mentioned social influencing before in one of our other questions. How much of a play going in the future will social influencers play? How big a role will they play versus regular ads on TV?
I think social influencers will play a huge role moving forward, and you're already starting to see that. And again, it is because Gen Z is not going to be exposed to advertising the way that the previous generations have been exposed. They are going to be discovering brands in social media. They're going to be discovering brands by people that they follow. It's not going to be by what's on TV. So I think that the use of influencers is going to play a huge role. We've seen firsthand at Nissan, we partnered with FaZe Clan, which is an esports team. And if you're not familiar with esports, it is probably the biggest and fastest growing sports environment or sports league that there is. So we partnered with FaZe Clan, which is one of the teams. And what we did is we gave them vehicles. We gave them kind of loose guidelines about, what we're looking to communicate, but really let them run with it and create the content. So they created all the content. They posted it on all of their social channels, and the response has been incredible. And I was trying to be optimistic, kind of going in and looking at it and thinking about this. And when I saw the results and when I saw what the potential was, I am a firm believer in this type of approach. What we saw in the pre-exposure versus post-exposure was a complete perception shift of the Nissan brand. So we were probably middle of the road when it came to performance and technology in the cars. And in the post-exposure, we were number one. And we were number one, and we surpassed another Silicon Valley-based automotive company when it comes to advanced technology. And I think when you can see that type of perception shift, that to me is huge. And again, this is an audience that probably doesn't have any preconceived notions about Nissan. They're probably not that aware of it. So this is kind of a brand new audience for us. And I thought that's a huge example of what the potential of working successfully with influencers can do.
You bring that up, and I'm gonna go back and kind of go back to our committee and the dealer body in general. As a group, the dealer body can be a little difficult, I know, when it comes to, hey, what's our ad going to look like today? When you start to look at going into these emerging technologies and these new segments and these new areas, how hard is it to convince the rest of the group that, hey, this is something to really give some credence to? Because that whole previous, I remember I pulled an ad from a marketing calendar from a couple of years ago, and I saw how much money was being spent in newspaper, and it blew my mind. And I'm thinking, okay, if I went back in time and told them, hey, you're going to be putting this money into social media, they're going to go, what? How do you change everyone else's opinion that, hey, this is a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, there are a few different ways. I think the first thing is kind of understanding, is it is it a long-standing trend? Is this going to be kind of behavior change, or is it just kind of single moment of time, and kind of understanding those two differences? When there is something that's going to be behavior change, but is not as well known to kind of all the different stakeholders that you have. To me, I think you use data, and data to me will always win in the boardroom. It will always win shareholders. It may take time for people to start to believe it, but I think you start to show the potential, you start to quantify it, you start to show what it can deliver on from a business goal standpoint. And I also think, especially in working with the dealers, and we've been talking about this, is sometimes all you need is you need to get a few dealers to be advocates for something and kind of test something out and see the results and feel them for themselves, and then they will be advocates to the rest of the dealer body. So that's an approach that we also took with the Facebook Live that we were doing, a couple of months ago, and now we're actually going to be rolling that out nationally, because the dealers that were part of that saw so much potential in what it can do and how they can attract consumers. So I think it's understanding the trends, using the data behind it to try to influence and convince the stakeholders about that, and then using, and getting advocates on board to start to show and spread the message on it. That to me is, people need to believe that these things are going to be, that they're going to work, or else why would you make those investment shifts? They need to see that it's going to work.
Keeping that same trend, if budgets didn't matter, where would you like to see where do you think advertising will go? And if you want to use Nissan as an example, you can. But if budgets aren't an example, where should people look at, or where should they be?
To me, online video is the biggest trend that we're seeing, and it's not a short-term trend. This is actually going to be behavior change. And online video is going, it's something that you'll have it could be addressable TV, it could be streaming, connected TV. It could also just be what you see on YouTube, or you see, kind of on, any of the publisher platforms. If you see it on Instagram, if you see it on Facebook, consumers like video content. And I think finally we're out of, finally we have other types of ad formats beyond digital banner, thank goodness. But we know consumers like video, but it's being able to deliver that type of video to them on the multiple screens that they have. That to me is the biggest shift. And when we're looking at it from a Nissan standpoint and from an investment standpoint, we're starting to combine TV and online video into just a video. So how do we look at video in totality? And then really the difference becomes, where does it show up?
So when you look at COVID and what's going on there, when you look at all the live production that's gone away, so live sports has gone away, and you're looking at TV shows that are in production right now, and you talk about the online video. So we've seen online video take off in all sorts of different areas. What's going to happen when we get back? Is there going to be such a lull, or are movies that have been waiting? Is movies going to be the more important media to be in?
I mean, we're having a ton of discussions about this very topic right now, because again, production has stopped, so new content isn't as available. And I think where advertisers show up, it's going to become very important over the next few months, because there is going to be wear out in some of the reruns that have been going on. I think the platforms and the publishers are finding ways to get new content out there. And so I think when you see kind of Apple TV Plus and they're releasing new content, when you see Disney Plus and they're also looking at movies, when you see Netflix, I think they're trying to find a way to bring new content to the market faster. And so I do think that these types of platforms are going to move a little bit faster than more of the traditional TV, which, you're going to have kind of some of the bigger productions. We may see a lot more reality show, because you can do that a little bit more virtually. But I think content is going to be the big thing. The sports piece of it is interesting too. And, obviously Nissan has a big relationship with sports. And we've been talking to the NCAA, and we've been talking to ESPN on what does college football look like? And ultimately it is up to the schools, and if they are, if the schools are going to go back in session. So the way that we're approaching that is actually we need to have a couple of different options. If depending on how the games end up being played, are they going to have fans in the stands? Are people going to be able to attend the games, maybe most likely in a social distancing way, or if they're not able to attend at all, what does that look like? In Europe, you're, already, the Premier League is back. They're just playing in an empty stadium. So I think there's going to, and I think the other thing is that consumers want to see live sports, and there's going to be even more of this pent-up demand for something new and something different for people to watch. And you saw that with The Last Dance. When The Last Dance, they actually accelerated launching that program because there wasn't any content, and that just, it took off like gangbusters. And so I think that the publishers are going to be much more creative in how they bring content to consumers. And then for us on the advertising side, we need to be able to have options. If it is about live sports, we need to be able to have options about how do you activate that type of media buy.
So what are some of the most interesting ways that you can activate those media buys?
Yeah, and I don't want to give away all of the secrets because it hasn't launched yet, but in the case of Heisman, we're looking at a couple of different ways. What is virtual? So, how do the Heismans interact in a virtual way, which I think, there's some they're pretty funny and I think engaging ways that we can be working with the Heisman players. Or if we can't be at games, if we can be at games, what does more of a mobile unit look like where there's less contact? So it's more of a contactless, but a still physical activation. And so we're looking at those two ways, a mobile activation unit and then a virtual activation unit. What's really interesting about live sports right now is that, again, if the games are going to be able to be played, in sports, you always want that experience to be delivered outside of just the people that are in the stands. That's ultimately what your goal is. And so this actually really pushes that. It pushes that challenge forward, because if your only option is to get it to people that are not in a stadium, you have to be very creative in how you deliver that. And that's where I think, the digital approach is probably the front runner in what we're going to be doing. And then this backup kind of mobile activation unit is secondary if games are able to be played and people are able to be in the stands.
I think you bring up a really good point. When I look at it from the dealership standpoint, and you look at digital retailing, you look at offsite deliveries, you look at unique ways to do paperwork, a lot of my fellow dealers, their lives changed virtually overnight. And things that they weren't thinking about didn't exist or weren't even in their mind, or they didn't make sense to them. I think you bring up a really good point about how we can start to look at engaging virtually versus where before we would just think, we're just going to worry about the in-game experience for the fan there. Now you really are forced to go, okay, how do we find a way to draw other people in? The one thing that I've learned about about all of digital retailing is it's not about buying the car online. It's about it's saving time along the process. It's giving them information. And if you wrap your hands around that, it's fine. It's when they think it's going to be that ultimate, I got to sell the car there. Our push through to the final step is very light. They stop usually after. So, but they think, oh my God, they got to buy it online. All right, you ready to go? Are you ready now?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. Allyson, I'd like to talk about social responsibility in advertising. Here in DC, the Washington Redskins, their advertisers from FedEx, Nike, they've come out against the team name. How much impact does that play, or do the social events play in the thought process of companies advertising?
It definitely comes to mind as we're doing this, because I think what you don't want is, as a brand, you don't want to be tone deaf. If there is a social movement that's going on, if there's a civil movement that's going on, you don't want to be tone deaf about that. When we look at it for Nissan, and I think, there are a lot of discussions about, what are the different media partners we should be with. I think ultimately we need to align with companies and platforms that we align on values. I think we also have to allow evolution to take place. And if that's policy change, on some of the parts of the platforms. And I think I would want on the Nissan side, I want us to be working with partners to drive that change versus kind of being part of cancel culture. To me, I want us to be able to be part of the discussions in the rooms as some of these policies are being made, to be an active participant in that as a brand and as an advertiser.
I think you bring up a really important point about wanting to be moving the discussion forward versus being the impetus of change. Is it hard to stay middle of the road though? Do you get pressure from groups talking to you about, oh, you need to, are you being pressured by, I mean, virtually everybody, I guess, because there's so many differences of opinion?
Yeah, and I think that the thing is, at least in my seat and in my chair, there's always pressure, and we're always getting feedback. We're trying to be middle of the road is difficult, especially when you're trying to be middle of the road, but at the same time break through. Those are two very difficult things to try to balance. So there is always pressure. There's a lot of pressure right now because we're dealing with a massive health pandemic, a massive global pandemic, which creates a lot of uncertainty, from a health standpoint, from an economic standpoint. And then you also have the social unrest. As a company, Nissan, we have been built and founded on diversity and inclusion, and those are core values for us. And so I think for me as the decision maker, it's finding the right type of partners to be working with and ensuring that they are going to be driving for change. And sometimes that's a little bit of a hug and a squeeze. And, I'm happy to do both of those depending on who we work with. But then it's also from a messaging standpoint and just keeping in mind that consumers are going through all of this. Everybody's kind of going through this together, and ensure that we're not being tone deaf as we're doing that. And that to me, it's a difficult balance. There is a ton of pressure, but if we're able to do this properly and be on the right side of history, people will remember us as a brand for that.
The one thing I wish people would really understand about Nissan as a brand is they have been a really big leader when it comes to diversity, especially in who we choose to advertise with. I remember sitting in a room learning about how we're one of the largest sponsors of the LGBTQ community. And when you start to look at that, it's a shame that you don't necessarily want to be getting credit, but it's something to be proud of that we actually are out there engaging in diversity.
Yeah, exactly. And I think and that conversation has come up too. We have been, and the company was actually founded, we were founded in Japan. We actually had an American that was on the board. So, that was groundbreaking at the time for a Japanese company to have a foreigner actually on the board. So we are founded in diversity and inclusion. It has been something that has carried throughout the course of the company's progression. From a marketing standpoint, we definitely have been huge sponsors and proponents for the LGBTQ community, the African American community, as well as the Hispanic community. And I think, this is where a large part of our consumer base is. It's where the population is going. So it's important for us to have relevant conversations with these types of audiences. And I think it's inherent in our values, and that's what we want to represent in our marketing. We don't promote that we do that all the time. I think, to me, actions speak louder than words. And if we're hitting the right type of consumers and they have a difference of opinion because of how Nissan partners, with these different audiences, then that to me is what success is.
I wouldn't want to let you go without asking you a few other things about the career. So, if anyone else was looking at getting into marketing or getting into automotive, what advice would you give to anyone looking to this as a potential career?
I lean into it. I think that there could be the perception, because I think a lot of attractive jobs are with some tech companies right now. If you have any interest in engineering and technology and design, and you like to operate in a fast and dynamic environment, automotive is incredible. I think that there is also if you're interested in changing and being a change agent, automotive is also great. There's going to be so much change when it comes to cars, people's relationship with cars, just through some of the technology that's actually in the cars. And we talked about connected cars earlier. the mobility services that are going to be coming. It's going to be a very, very interesting field to be a part of. And so I would lean into it. It's not, it's not a dinosaur industry. It's actually very, very dynamic. And if you like those types of things, it's a great career. I think, once you get in, learn all of the different aspects of the business. I started my career working with dealers on the tier 3. I've been marketing, but I've also had a lot of exposure to different parts of the automotive industry, and learn the sales side, get experience with dealers, get experience with business development dealers, understand how cars are sold, understand certified pre-owned, make close connections with the design team and the product team. And it's build up your base of knowledge, and that will make you better at whatever discipline you end up going into.
And if you were to pick 3 of the most influential people from your past, who would you pick?
The most influential person was definitely my dad. I think I'm a twin, so I have a twin brother, and I think he didn't really differentiate gender for us. He just let us, kind of do what we wanted to do, and he never tried to, stop us. And I had big ambitious dreams. I knew I wanted to travel the world. I knew I didn't want to go into, some of the family business, and he empowered me to do that. So he's definitely number 1. Number 2 is Jack Pitney, who was the CMO for BMW in around 2007 to 2010. I learned a lot from him. When I met him, I knew he was the type of CMO that I wanted to be. He was very good at motivating teams. He knew how to speak to all the stakeholders, how to talk to dealers. He knew how to talk to us on the agency side, which was where I was at the time. He just knew how to motivate us, and he was able to, I mentioned this earlier, but to kind of hug and squeeze depending on what we all needed at the time. And then the third person is Lori Senecal, who was the president of the ad agency I worked for when we were working for BMW. And from her, I really learned how to be a female in a male-dominated industry, and some of the challenges that come along with that. But more importantly, how do you kind of create your own brand, and how do you establish yourself in that world and be true to who you are? And so those are the 3 kind of monumental people that have really stuck out and really supported me and mentored me the most in my career.
Do you really feel that automotive is still a male-dominated industry?
I don't think so as much anymore. I think when I first started out, it probably was. I think, people ask me that a lot. I don't really ever think about it, and I actually never have. I think when you look at the proportion of women that are making car buying decisions, which is, it's over 50% now. I think it's disproportionate based on that. But it's never really something that I sit down and think about. And for me, it's not that it's any harder, it's just that it's different. And I enjoy this industry. I've had a lot of fun. I've had, so far I've had an incredible career, and I want that to keep going. But it's a fun, dynamic environment. And to me, it's not about gender. I think if you're inspired and motivated by those challenges, it's the perfect industry for you to be in.
It's interesting you should say it that way, because I look at it here at the dealership in our microcosm. I look at it from the standpoint, we just have great people. We don't look at them as gender. We don't look at them as color. We don't look at them as sexual orientation. It's, I don't know. We just hire, the people who we have around us, they do good work. And that's how we've always looked at them. And I think that's the part that's really been a great change in our industry, is we're not stagnant to one group. It's, can you do the job? And yeah, great. Then you're the person. Let's go. That's the part that I get encouraged about when I think of automotive.
Yeah, and I think it's about talent development. It's, it's like, who is that potential? For a long time in my career, I was kind of the dark horse in a lot of the jobs that I ended up getting, because again, I started out on the dealer side and, kind of dealer communications, and, going from that to ad agency was kind of unheard of. and then, transitioning and making some of these transitions, I was a little bit of the dark horse, but people saw potential in me. They saw, skills that I had. And I think that wasn't necessarily because I was a female. It's just because I had that skill and I had the desire and I had the curiosity. And that to me isn't gender specific. It's about, what motivates you.
Yeah, I've always been encouraged by the phrase "you hire for attitude and you train for skill" at that point in time. So
yeah.
So if there was one thing I should have asked you but I didn't, what would that be?
I'm trying to think. You didn't ask me any background information on the marketing subcommittee, really.
Well,
Not going to give anybody any dirt.
I guess you can. I mean, I don't mind if you, actually, if you would like some, I can give you dirt on myself if you want.
All right, I'll take that. I'll take it.
I'm sure you will, because it will come up if you ask anybody else that was there. So when Francisco was still there, Francisco got a hold of one of my old ads. And I did a full Monty sale. So there's
oh my gosh.
If you can go online and you may still be able to Google it, Pohanka Full Monty sale. We had some very brave members of the dealership agree to hold whiteboard signs in front of them with their shirts off and their pants rolled up, so they didn't exactly look like it was. So we did a full Monty sale. So I'll share with you my dirt. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, other than that, I don't know what other dirt's out there about our marketing subcommittee. I mean, it's a pretty good group.
I think
it's a pretty good group of people. I mean, maybe it's the fact that Wayne. The only other big surprise is the fact that Wayne is good friends with Howard Stern. I mean, I don't know.
that is a good one.
That's one you probably wouldn't.
I think we have a good group. Yep, exactly. I think we've got a good group, though.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that the interesting thing about working with this subcommittee or working with Nissan or working with the manufacturer on the level that I've been able to is I really get exposed to more of the inner thinking, and it really helps me understand my direction as to where we need to go as a dealership. I've always been excited about getting more of that information. I couldn't imagine doing my job as effectively without more of that input that we've been able to get from the executive team at Nissan. And I'm really excited. Mike Colleran was our RVP, and it turns out he was married in Stafford County, which is right next to me. So he's got a little bit of a tie to the area. But those are things that, getting to know the executive team outside of just going to an NADA function or going to a dealer development car show, that's the part I think has been great. And, you all coming out in the market has been helpful. So, but the only thing I would say about our subcommittee that is crazy sometimes is how you all are able to manage the fact that we as dealers all have different opinions.
Well, I think it's I think I couldn't do my job without having the input of dealers. I think it's important that we don't just sit here, at headquarters and not get the input from kind of the stakeholders that are having direct conversations with consumers. So I don't think that I could do my job without the input of our dealers. And I really enjoy working with the marketing subcommittee, and I get a lot of inspiration and a lot of great ideas come from that. And you've seen, we make a lot of adjustments based on the dialogue there. I think balancing the different opinions, it's maybe it's something I'm used to doing, because as a marketer, everyone is always going to have an opinion. And, for me, it's about looking through and really understanding what the points are and how can we take some of that to make whatever it is that we're doing better. Or if I feel like it's something that is going to be, that will not improve it, just having a productive discussion about why we don't feel it's right to make the change. And I think that comes with trust. And I think we've developed that over the last year, is that we really trust each other. You trust that I respect your opinion and I'm going to change, if it's something that the dealer body feels strongly about. And you all trust me that if I'm, if I have a different point of view and I think that something's going to be, detrimental or maybe not the best idea, you trust me. And I think we've built that over the last year.
One thing I've learned that if we're all in the same room and we all agree on the same thing, that's the first time we all have to go, wait a second. We're all agreeing. Yeah. maybe something is wrong. But the other thing I'll say, and that I'll say, I really enjoyed the experience of learning from the different areas we've gone. So we were able to go to Chiat Day for a meeting at one. We were in their offices, and that was amazing to look at the creative in California and just how amazing that building is. Or we got to go to Twitter, which was amazing in of its own right. Those are really those are things that that I look at and go, wow, it's amazing to me to think that a guy who went to school in Fredericksburg and grew up in this area, someone says, where are you going? I tell them where we went. They're going, where? So it's been a lot of fun. It's a lot of great information. So I guess I don't think there's much dirt there. I mean, we're a pretty clean group.
No, so. We are a pretty clean group. I was joking around.
No, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to have a conversation with me and with everyone here. I think it's interesting to hear the standpoint of not only marketing but automotive. And thank you for taking the time.
No, I appreciate it. I'm so glad we were able to do this, and I always love talking to you. So this was a lot of fun. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. That was Allyson Witherspoon. This has been another episode of Fredericksburg Strong, one of our business and technology episodes. Look forward to seeing you here again.
Thanks for listening to the Fredericksburg Strong podcast. Be sure to visit fredericksburgstrong.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content, as well as submit a request for you or your organization to appear on one of our future episodes. See you next time with another exciting episode of Fredericksburg Strong.